If you've ever watched a movie set in New York City, their S1 image that shows up again and again. A river of bright yellow taxis sliding through the streets. They're so iconic that a lot of people assume New York taxis have always been yellow, but they haven't. So the real question is, why yellow? Was it just a random style choice? Was it marketing? Or is there a deeper reason tied to history, city, life, and even a bit of science? Alright, let's rewind. More than 100 years. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. New York taxis were kind of a mess in the sense that there was no single look. You could see taxis painted red, green, dark blue, black, sometimes even with different designs, depending on the company. There wasn't one clear standard. And that might sound fun and colorful, but in practice, it created problems. People had a harder time telling which cars were real taxis and which ones weren't. Tourists got tricked. Drivers competed aggressively for attention. And the city was getting more crowded every year, with more vehicles, more people, and more confusion. New York needed order. It needed something that helped passengers immediately recognize a taxi fast without thinking too hard. And then comes the key character in this story, John D. Hertz. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Hertz later became famous for building a major car rental business. But before that, he was deeply involved in taxis. And what made Hertz different is that he didn't treat taxis like random cars on the street. He treated the taxi business like a system, a service, a brand, something people needed to trust. So he asked a simple but smart question. What color can people spot the fastest in a busy city? And this is where the science comes in. Research on human vision even back then pointed to something very practical. Yellow is one of the easiest colors for the human eye to notice, especially from far away and especially in low-light conditions. Think about it. In a city like New York, you're dealing with rain, fog, nighttime traffic, crowded streets, and a ton of movement. Dark colors blend into the background. But yellow jumps out. So Hertz made a decision. He painted his taxi fleet yellow, and it worked really well. Passengers could see the cabs faster. They could spot them across the street. They could recognize them in traffic. And when something becomes easy and reliable, people start trusting it. Before long, yellow wasn't just a color, it was a signal. It told you, this is a cab you can grab. This is legit. Other taxi companies noticed, and they started copying the idea. More yellow taxis! Hit the streets! And little by little, yellow became the default taxi color in New York. Not because the city forced it at first, but because it solved a real problem. But eventually, the city did step in. By the 1930s, New York wanted stronger control over the taxi industry. The streets were crowded, competition was intense, and illegal or unregulated taxis were a real concern. So, in 1937, the city introduced what became famous as the medallion system. Basically, the city limited the number of legal taxis and required official licensing. It was a big shift. Taxis weren't just vehicles anymore. They were part of a regulated public service. And as part of that, the city leaned into something that already made sense to everyone. The yellow taxi. Making taxis a consistent color had clear benefits. It helped people identify licensed taxis instantly. It discouraged scams. It created a sense of uniformity and safety. And it also helped New York build something cities rarely get, a visual identity that the whole world recognizes. Over time, the yellow cab became more than transportation. It became culture. It showed up everywhere. Movies, TV shows, album covers, postcards, tourist photos. It became a symbol of New York's energy. Fast, loud, crowded, always moving. And for a lot of people, a yellow taxi is their first real New York moment. You land at the airport. You walk outside. You see the yellow cab line. You hop in, and suddenly, you feel like you're in the city for real. And here's the thing. Once a symbol gets that strong, it's hard to replace it. So, even today, you might wonder, why not change the color? Why not modernize? Why not let taxis be anything? Because yellow still works. It's still highly visible. It still helps tourists. It still makes taxis easy to spot in a split second. And in a city as intense as New York, that visibility is not a small detail, it's the whole point. People are constantly in motion. They're late. They're rushing. They don't want to search for a car, they want to see it instantly. And even with ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft dominating transportation in many places, yellow taxis still have a unique role in New York. You can hail them on the street. They're regulated. They're part of the city's long-running public transit ecosystem. They're familiar. And for many visitors, that familiarity feels safer than guessing which car is theirs. So when you see a yellow taxi in New York, you're not just seeing a car painted a bright color, you're seeing a solution to a real urban problem visibility and trust in a city that needed fast answers. You're seeing a decision based on human perception and practical design. You're seeing the result of history, regulation, and culture all stacking on top of each other until one color became a global symbol. And that's the coolest part of this story. It wasn't random. New York taxis are yellow because yellow is the color people notice fastest. The color that helped passengers identify real taxis. And the color that slowly turned into a shared city tradition until it became impossible to imagine New York without it. So next time you see a yellow cab rolling by, just remember, sometimes the things we think are just tradition actually started as a smart, practical decision. That worked so well. It became history. And if you've stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you for listening and for sharing this moment, this small story behind one of New York's most familiar sights.